So today we are discussing co-venturing with the U.S. Just to give you a bit of background on this session, we started this session a few years ago, and the reason we did is because as independent producers in Canada, with money continually being squeezed, it has become obvious to many Canadian producers that the way to go about funding your programs is to extend the reach of it, and partnering with the U.S. seems a very logical way to go about that. I will not be introducing the panel. That will be Erin Haskett, who is here as our moderator today, but I will tell you a little bit about Erin's background. Erin began her career in television as a sales executive for Forefront Entertainment. She did business affairs on The Collector. She was associate producer on Terminal City. She was director of development at Infinity Films, where she managed a growing slate of feature projects, including Terry Gilliam's The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus and Charles Martin Smith's The Stone of Destiny. Erin was also the director of development at Paperny Films and executive producer on 2 series in productions, The Real Housewives of Vancouver, Save on Meats for Oprah Winfrey Network Canada, at Lark Productions, where she currently serves as vice president of development. Please join me in a warm welcome for Erin and our panelists.
Hello, thanks, Helen. Welcome, everybody, to TV Day. I'm excited. I think we have a really good panel today. And I just want to introduce you to each of them. I'm sure you've read their bios, but I'll start with Noreen. Noreen is the president of dramatic programming at E1 Television. She oversees all series, including the new pickup of The Firm, which is with Shaw and NBC, and has just started production. She's also involved in Hell on Wheels for AMC, Rookie Blue for ABC and Global, Haven for Sci-Fi and Showcase. And she also was involved in The Bridge for CTV, CBS, and Testes with FX and Showcase. So Noreen has a big body of work to speak to this panel today. She's also worked with Tara on a number of occasions, too.
Did you just say I have a big body?
You have a big body of work, So next to Noreen is Tara, who is Senior Director of Original Content for Shaw Media. She oversees scripted, drama, and comedy for the conventional network Global and the specialty channels Showcase and History. Tara's also been involved in Rookie Blue, Haven, Lost Girl, Combat Hospital, and a number of series over a number of years, I guess, with Shaw. So we're lucky to have Tara here today. We've got Sheila Hawken, who's here as an independent producer, and Sheila has been working with Showtime for a long time. She started doing, I think it was 5 seasons of Queer as Folk.
Yep.
For Showtime and Showcase. She was a producer on The Tudors, on The Borgias, and also some big reality formats like Canada's Top Model and How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria.
Right.
So also a very different experience on a number of projects here. And Matt Lowe's, who's very familiar with Vancouver, has spent a lot of time here, although hasn't been here in a while, I guess.
True.
Matt is the president of scripted entertainment, senior vice president of programming for Fox TV Studios. He was the president of scripted entertainment for Pearson North America, where he oversaw 66 episodes of First Wave here in Vancouver. He has a great knowledge of talent, having founded a literary management company prior to joining Fox, and he's currently overseeing a number of development and production projects, including Burn Notice and White Collar for USA. So we're very lucky today. At Lark Productions, what we do in any job interview, we always start with, what do you watch on television? So I just wanted to ask you guys, other than your series that you're involved in, which you watched a number of cuts of, what are you watching on TV right now? And Noreen, do you want to start?
Does it have to be on air right this moment, or can we talk like the last season?
Oh, no, you can talk about last season. I guess, what's your favorite series in the last year and a half? Okay, Sheila, do you want to start? Do you have
Justified.
Ooh.
And The Killing.
Great.
I have to say, I love Justified. I love The Killing. I tend to graze a lot, so my TiVo is kind of filled with everything in every direction. Right now it's kind of the reality system time, so there's my wife's controlling a lot of the reality television. A lot of the FX shows, I think a lot of the FX comedies, I think are really fun and really unique. Louis, I think is sensational and very, very funny. How I have to say, I got very, even though we do it, so I'm not entirely objective, but I really got caught up in the killing.
Tara?
Me? I love Boardwalk Empire. I'm really excited about the next season of that. I'm addicted to Celebrity Rehab and all of its offshoots. I love that show. Really, seriously addicted. I love Modern Family, 30 Rock, Community. I've got a whole slew of comedies always on my PVR. And what else? I'm also just checking out all the new shows that are premiering on our network and our competitors, just to see what's going on, see if there's anything addiction worthy. True Blood. Yeah.
I love Modern Family. Episodes on Showtime. Where's it airing here?
TMN, Movie Central.
Which if you haven't watched it, make sure you keep watching, because the first episode,
it's not good.
and then it just gets better and better and better. And I'm really obsessed with everything on BBC America right now. So there's a show called Jekyll, a show called The Hour. If you're not watching it, you have to watch it. It's, I think, one of the best things on television. Yeah.
Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's take a look at a couple of the shows that some of these guys were involved in. We've got an E1 clip series, and then we're going to show a couple of global and showcases series.
Sure, if I might, skip that scene. You're the only one who got a decent report. Now, you all might think that this mountain training is no big deal. Special skill to pad your resume. But I went to backbeat on this. Told them that I had 3 rookies from 15 who was worth their time. Look at the person next to you. For a second. Go ahead. Ollie. That is the person who deserves your very best. And I expect much better from you today.
I think not that maybe your accidents stir something inside of you, like perhaps your conscience? Every man, woman, and child has one, right, Jack? Yours just happens to be a little less puffy than you. Conscience? You think you're my conscience? You're even sicker than I thought.
Seriously can't feel pain.
It's called idiopathic neuropathy.
You really couldn't feel it when that car door hit your hand.
No.
Can you feel fire?
No.
Ice?
Oddly, yes, I can feel ice.
You can feel ice?
No. I can feel a headache, Tanya. No.
Some people call them the troubles.
What could have done this? The 10 plagues are upon us.
We need to figure out how to stop this.
A new season of Haven, coming soon, only on Showcase.
It's a nice promo. I really like this promo.
Isn't it good?
Yeah.
Our marketing team.
It's really arresting.
Yeah.
It's a great promo.
We're in the middle of a very dangerous place. It's my job to help you find a way. You saved a life. Congratulations. Have a cookie. To make the You can do this. You to disobey orders, you'd be out of a job. Do I make myself clear? This is. We're in the middle of a very dangerous place. It's my job to help you find a way. Saved a life. Congratulations. Have a cookie. Make the
Oh, well.
Okay, we'll come back to that one. We've got to.
Continue to disobey orders, you'd be out of
Sounds good.
We'll take a look at that at the end of the session. You can pull it off the DVD.
Wasn't in the manual.
Call that hospital. Seriously.
Do we have lights? Okay. Okay. Anyway, I think that there's some really great television there. I know it's not always meant to be viewed off a laptop, but I think we figured it out sort of halfway through. So thanks for sending those in. You know, I thought we'd just start today just kind of putting some context to what's been going on in the last couple of years. And I just wonder if you guys could just speak, you know, maybe Matt, we'll start with you. If you could just speak to why this trend of this kind of partnership and why now?
It's an interesting question. I think, I believe kind of, you know, historically, if you track back to the Writers Guild strike 2 years ago, the American television business kind of got frozen. And you know, there was this big announcement in the trades that said, Canada is sexy. And everybody kind of looked at each other and went, huh? Canada's been sexy for a while, but anyway, anyway, there was you know, none of the broadcasters could make new television, and I think there were a lot of companies that kind of woke up and said, you know, hey, there's an opportunity to co-produce and create content that isn't driven by traditional means, and in conjunction with that, I think the American broadcasters sort of woke up and said, wow, a lot of these shows are really costing a tremendous amount of money, and in order to be able to afford to do a lot of the shows we're doing, we're going to have to figure out alternative forms of content. And the co-production model isn't a new concept. I think we've all been doing it all the way back to the action hours that we did in the sort of late 80s and 90s. But I think that idea on steroids was something that I think everybody has kind of embraced. And all the big broadcasters, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, have all suddenly opened their doors to really the concept of, you know what, we're going to have to figure out how to be partners with other broadcasters and other funding sources to be able to afford new content.
Right.
I would add one other thing, because I truly believe the success of these co-productions all started with the writer's strike, but at the same time, the advertising dollars, just the ad sales were taking a nosedive. So it's those two things that came together at the same time, and all of a sudden, a bunch of specifically broadcast networks thought, how the hell are we going to keep creating all of this original content at the same dollar level as our ad sales are tanking? And I think the confluence of those events is what really opened up the doors. They look north. People who speak the same language, there really aren't terribly funny accents, landscape that looks similar, cultural, I mean, some differences, but a lot of similarities. And Flashpoint really is the show that opened up the doors. And then there's a bunch of our shows that were able to just take advantage of that. And again, because there was success, because there were really good shows being made, the doors stayed open. And there's a huge opportunity right now where those doors are open in a big way. So it's the impetus is on, the onus is on us. If we can keep making good shows, they're going to stay open.
Right. And Sheila, before Flashpoint, you were involved in Queer as Folk, which had a U.S. involvement and a Canadian involvement. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that and how that came to be.
That was 2000 to 2005, and I was working with a partner company who had a strong relationship with Showtime. They were service producing for Showtime in Canada, both in Toronto and eventually in BC. Dufferin Gate Productions had a BC entity that Rose Lamb eventually ran. And Showtime were sort of interested in the British series Queer as Folk, and they weren't entirely sure, and they, again, even at that time, they didn't want to put massive amounts of money into it. And they sent it to us, and they sent the British show to us, and I took a look at it, and I went to my partners, and I said, we can't do this, they're going to screw it up. It's going to be terrible, we can't get them, because it was so beautiful, the British series was so limited. And then we read the, Showtime hired a very clever showrunning team, and they wrote a manifest for the show. They talked about how brave it had to be, and it had to be at least as courageous as the British show. And we read that, and then we got very engaged in conversation with Showtime. So Showtime basically invited us, as people with whom they had done business before, to become the Canadian producer of the show.
Right. And at what stage did the Canadian broadcaster get involved?
We went to Showcase after we committed to doing the show.
Okay. So just to look at a different way, okay, let's talk about Rookie Blue, for example. Noreen, or actually Tara, do we want to start with you? Just how did that project come to be?
Well, before I joined Global, my colleagues Christine Shipton and Rachel Nelson started developing it with Alana Frank, the producer, and a couple of great emerging writers, Morwen Brebner and Ellen Van Stone, who had co-created the project. And so they developed it like we would develop any Canadian drama project. They wrote some scripts. We always knew it was a fantastic concept, very watchable and appealing, a great young cast. And it was something that felt like it would be a great fit for Global. And then we got to a point where it was sort of, we had to do something or not do something with it. It got into its point where it reached its creative potential, and it needed a bit of juice. And I think at that point, Noreen, were you involved at that point, or you came involved?
That's where we had, E1 had a first look deal with Alana Frank. And so she had brought us the project, and we started discussions. And when we read the script that existed, we said, this truly, and I think we had conversations with you and Christine at that point, this felt like a show that was such potentially a great ABC show. And that part, I think that again is sort of what's key to the success of these co-ventures, co-productions, whatever we call them, cross-border shows, is that idea of the show that's going to work for both of these, two broadcasters where everyone's going to share the same vision. And so at that point, Tassie
Cameron came on board as showrunner and head writer. And we, based on Tassie's vision of the project, and I believe she could execute a fantastic show, we greenlit it to series because we were committed to doing the project with or without a partner. It was something we really believed in for Global. And at that point...
And that was the key. I think that was what enabled us to then sell it into the U.S., was the fact that Global had said, we're committed, we're moving forward. So then we brought the project with Tassie and Alana down to LA, and we pitched it at all of the networks. But we actually went into ABC first and said to the then president of the network, Steve McPherson, this is a show, CBS has their Flashpoint. We want you to have your show that you can have for a great deal, but that will be just as good as anything else on your network. This is a show that's been developed in Canada by Global, but the producers really feel like it's a show for ABC, and Global had a lot of shows that were succeeding on their channel on ABC, so it was a good partnership. We pitched it everywhere, and there were 2 networks that wanted it, and there was a bit of a bidding war. And then the other key ingredient, I think, in that whole mix is that our executive in Canada, Quinn Taylor, who runs the alternative...
In the U.S.
Sorry, in the U.S.
Yeah.
Runs it's called the co-production or he is charged basically with overseeing these kinds of shows that are alternatively financed. And he and Tara and the whole team at Global developed a really good relationship where it was clear they were making the same show together, and conversations happened between the 2 networks, and there was a real... That is the key to all of this, that there's got to be a meeting of the minds of the 2 broadcasters.
So was it a problem that you didn't have a pilot?
I think it may have been an advantage, actually. You know, I think pilots can be really useful, but they can also be really limiting, because if your pilot doesn't allow a partner to participate in the vision of the show. I mean, they can participate from episode 2 on, but they can also see what may have not worked so well in a pilot when you don't have, when you don't have the breadth of budget that you have when you're going straight to series, and you don't have them participating fully as a partner. So I think it can be a plus, but it can be a minus too.
Right. You mentioned Quinn Taylor. Now, was he also involved in Combat Hospital?
Yes, he was.
And how did Combat Hospital come to be? Because I also understand it's an international treaty co-production.
Yeah, that's a series that, again, we developed from a pitch that we got from the creators, Doug Steinberg and Jinder Chalmers. And we developed scripts, and we went in a whole bunch of different directions on that show. First, we thought we might do a backdoor pilot, so a feature-length pilot. We thought, well, maybe we'll do a limited series. It was a big show to tackle. I mean, both in subject matter and in the budget that we needed to make that show. And we actually went to the UK-Canada co-production model, not because of, well, partly because of budget, but also because we felt like we really needed the international ability to attract cast, because it's obviously, if any of you have seen it or know what it's about this multinational force that mans this hospital in Kandahar. So we needed Europeans, we needed Americans, and we needed, of course, the people who live in Afghanistan. The international co-production really helped us in that regard. And then, just in order to put this massive thing together, we needed all kinds of partners. So we had the British side, and then luckily ABC came on board after I think we had 4 scripts in the can. And the producers went down, pitched it, and they sat and read 4 scripts over the weekend, and luckily for us, fell in love with it.
Well, and so to the international co-production and the involvement of an American network as well as a Canadian partner, Matt, I guess maybe mental is something that you could talk about, because it started, can you just tell how it started with you and how the Canadian partner got involved, and then how you ended up shooting in Colombia?
There's got to be some good stories.
Yeah, in Colombia.
Some of these are, come together very organically. Some of them come together very messily. And mental definitely goes in the category of, this was a messy, bouncy, weird ride. It was actually a pilot originally developed at TNT. It went down the line in their development and got very far, and ultimately didn't get picked up. And we all really liked the script, and we did what you kind of do with pilots that don't go. They kind of go in the stack, and you kind of opine the death of one of your children. And along the way, the strike broke out, and we thought, well, there's got to be a way to launch this and get it up. And we started talking with Rob Lobel and Rob Merrill's, trying to figure out if there was a way to do it in conjunction with a Canadian partner, and we got fairly well down the line with that, and then the strike ended, and the showrunners came back, and suddenly it went from, oh, well, okay, now they're involved, and we had brought on another Canadian writer into it, so it was a bit of a, it was a messy, odd situation, and I happened to be, we had gotten a new head of our studio who was Argentinian and was very focused on doing things in Latin America because that's where he came from, and I remember actually I was at the office late one night. It was like 8:30 at night, and I was walking down the hall, and he poked his head out and said, "Hey Matt, can you go to Columbia tomorrow?" And well, I guess so. Sure. He goes, "Okay, we're going to do mental there," and we thought, okay. I immediately went to the, I Googled Bogota, Colombia. Thought, okay, my life, this one's going to be interesting. Okay, and called Rob LaBelle and said, "Hey, this one's going to be a confusing one." But somehow we looked at all the different models, trying to figure out whether there was a way to co-produce between Canada and South America, or whether there was a way to bring a U.S. broadcaster in or not. We ultimately ended up just saying, look, you know what, we'll fund it. Let's just fund it and build it, and somewhere along the way we will find the broadcasters and the partners, and so we kind of started it really on our own bootstraps. And as it turns out, Columbia was an interesting mix for LA, and with that second unit, we ended up being able to pull it off, and the partners came along the way in drafts. But I think it was really part of our chairman's point of view, which was, like, there's an awful lot of broadcasters that are buying things around the world who come to the U.S. and come to the upfronts and say, okay, well, we'll take one of those and one of those, and some of them go, some of them don't, some of them end up in libraries, but all the international broadcasters were looking for a commitment of at least 13 so that they could count on it as part of their programming schedules. And we really went into it saying, okay, we're going to deliver, start with 3 of them, 3 series, and we're going to do 3 of them where we'll go directly into 13, and we'll build them as if we're building a normal U.S. show, and we'll trust that the partners will be able to come afterwards. And it was an experiment 1.0 of this model.
And on the international front, I mean, Sheila, the period series that you've been involved in, I mean, there's obviously a number of international partners you've worked with there, and has also had U.S. involvement.
Yeah.
How exactly have those series, have they started in development with a British company, or I guess at what stage do you get involved and with the international co-pros, and how has the U.S. network driven it? Sorry.
Me personally getting involved is slightly separate from how it comes together, because I'm not the Prodco, I'm not the Canadian Prodco, but I hang out with the same group of people by and large over the last 10 years, and so they're the people who actually put these together. Both the tutors came together through relationships with producers in Ireland. It was maybe going to be English for a while, but then it really settled with producers in Ireland, and they had done prior work for Showtime, as had we, and they wanted to take the project into Showtime, and they felt they needed a Canadian co-producer in order to bring a treaty co-pro, to bring the kind of financing required. These historical dramas tend to be extremely expensive, partially because you have to start from scratch. You have to generally build large sets, but then so do most dramas, but costumes and props, and you can't go to the store and buy any of this stuff. So they tend to be fairly production intensive and expensive. So everybody knew that if the Tutors was to be done, it needed to be done well, which meant it needed a decent budget, which really, given the British Isles origin of it, it was a natural treaty co-pro with Canada. For a while there was going to be another European entity involved, but in the end we managed to finance it through Ireland and Canada. So it went to Showtime as a treaty co-pro. And then the Borgias, the same group of people, another member of our Irish colleagues, another member of that firm, had been producing Neil Jordan's most recent film, Ondine. And Neil Jordan was interested in taking what he had once thought of as being a movie project on the Borgias. I hope that's not my phone that's buzzing, but he was interested in taking that into television as an experiment. And So he and his Irish producer, James Flynn, again part of this group of these Irish producers with whom we worked on The Tudors, talked to us and said, it seems like a similar model that we used on The Tudors, and should we all go to Showtime together with that? So we went in with that. At that time, Showtime was considering, they knew they wanted to do another period drama because The Tudors had brought them such a good, strong audience. And they wanted to follow it up with something, and they were going back and forth between Camelot, which was another Michael Hirst project, Michael Hirst having written The Tudors, and the Borgias, and they went for the Borgias in the end. And the Borgias actually came together as it's Canada, Hungary, Ireland. And the reason it's Hungary is because we looked all over Europe to see where we could shoot it cost effectively, as everybody up here understands that game. Looked at Spain, looked at Croatia, looked at Ireland, but it seemed impractical, and ended up the incentives in Hungary were the best, and locations were a bit challenging, but that's where we ended up.
So now that we have a sort of a bit of a picture in terms of how some of these shows have come together, I mean, I work in development, and I'm always curious when you're looking at a project at a pitch stage, and you're considering who you might sell it to or who the partners might be. You know, right now, I guess, Tara, from a broadcast standpoint, or Matt, from a studio standpoint, are you looking immediately for that show that could work in Canada and the U.S., or in Canada and the U.K. with the U.S.? Is that becoming a new factor in terms of looking at the creative content?
You want to go?
I mean, for me, I tend to look at good first and foremost. Do I want to watch it? Is it with a writer that has the experience to be able to deliver it? Because most pitches that come in tend to start with a good idea, but the execution of it and the ability to really have the passion to be able to pull it all the way through, ideally for the next 7 years, and be able to execute it is a crazy three-dimensional collection of different skills that have to come in, and we tend to make our writers into both producers and general contractors and invest them in this idea of a showrunner. I know the producing system's different up here, but I think we first and foremost, from the Fox point of view, look at who's the writer, can he deliver it, and then worry about can we sell it and where we will sell it afterwards. Because I think if you like it and it's something you want to watch, there will be a place where ultimately you'll find it.
And we have a pretty, we have an array of different types of projects and different financing scenarios that we look at, because we have, particularly for Showcase, we've got a really huge appetite for Canadian content. So we're not going to be able to do full 10 out of 10 Shaw Media only CMF finance shows and fill our schedule. And also I think it really enriches our schedule to have all different types of shows. So for instance, a show like Lost Girl, we developed, and we actually developed it back when we were Alliance Atlantis, so it's been through 3 owners, just like me. And so we developed that and put it into production, and we solely financed it with the producer and distributor. And now it's going to premiere on Sci-Fi in the States, which is kind of nice, in January. And then the other promo you saw, Haven, was something that came to us a different way. It was developed by the showrunners and E1, who had brought it to us at an earlier stage, and we really liked it. It was a really terrific read. It was a great script, and had, you know, the imprimatur of Stephen King and all that brings to a show in terms of profile. So we liked it, but it was something that we weren't going to be able to really be the first ones in and trigger. So we tracked it, and we were really excited when it all came together internationally.
We never, ever stopped talking to them. But it's actually an interesting one, because there's, I mean, what you're hearing is there's no one way of putting these together. It's like no deal too weird. The way that Haven came together is completely different from anything else we've talked about, which is a fantastic script that was written, developed at ABC. And as you know, to Matt's point, when something is really good, you just don't ever want to let it go. So because it had Stephen King, we actually felt we could finance it internationally. And so we put together the financing and greenlit the show through international, and then came back to North America and said, we're making this show, Sci-Fi Shaw, do you guys want in? And luckily they both, I guess, were compelling enough, and the show was compelling enough, and we are hopefully going to get the third season pickup in the next 24 hours or so.
Yay.
Probably shouldn't say that till it's happened, but oh well.
So we look at all different types of scenarios and partnerships. It makes sense for us. It's a great way for us to stretch our dollars and get a whole bunch of interesting projects on the air, frankly.
Right. And now, with regards to the Canadian content element of these series and how, whether it's a CMF series, and we're not going to get into the details of that because we might not want to fall asleep right now. But you can read the guidelines; they're online, and if you can figure them out, let me know. But the Canadian content and dealing with either a U.S. studio or a U.S. broadcaster, playing Toronto for Toronto, casting Canadian leads. I mean, what have been the biggest challenges for you guys in these partnerships and maintaining the Canadian content so that you have that for your Canadian broadcaster? Who wants to start with that one?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I can speak from our perspective. I think what's always hardest on any project, well, everything's hard, but I find casting is so challenging. Unless you have the right person immediately, it's very challenging. And then for a producer and a broadcaster with other partners, obviously, if everyone has voice at the table, we're not always going to agree, and it can be really difficult. I find that one of the more challenging parts of the process.
And I think just to add to that, it is maintaining the vision of the show because we started talking at the very beginning. I think Matt touched on this. When I first started in the business, we used to make shows that we called Euro puddings, and literally you would get France in, and Germany in, and Canada in, and the U.S. in, and you just make the show really fast because you were telling everyone something different. And then it's true.
So you made it really quickly? So
you made it really fast before they would
Figured
catch
out.
up. Now, some of the shows
We're faster
kind of
now.
worked. And there was less, the business was way less sophisticated and television was way less sophisticated. You can't do that anymore. And if you do, you're not going to get a second season order. So all of these challenges are very real. But I think the biggest one is if you have partners, be it 2, be it 3, which is very challenging, everyone's got to agree on what the creative is. So you can't be telling one partner you're making an action show and the other partner that you're making a relationship drama, which I know sounds so obvious, but it happened very unsuccessfully in the past. So, and I think again, as our business matures and sort of this whole concept of needing partners, it's not going to go away. What I think we're all endeavoring to do, sometimes more successfully, sometimes less, is if you've got a partner, you got to be in there, in the trenches with them from the beginning, making the same show and really hashing out those differences. And casting becomes a real challenge because that's sort of where people have different ideas.
Yeah, and to be frank, it's always a challenge. In any show, it's always rewarding and difficult and all those things.
Yes. But wouldn't you also say it's one of the reasons, like once you've done it with one partner, it's easier because then you've got a bit of a vocabulary. I saw that look.
Yeah. Trying to think, is it easier? Well, then it's also done, too.
Right.
In Rookie Blue, it's done.
Right.
You don't have to do it again.
Right. But and it is also about, it's a language. It's, it's learning what that other person wants and how you make it work together.
But in terms of the Canadian content piece of it, I find that our partners are very respectful of what we need to do to have a Canadian show on the air, what we need to do for all various rules and regulations. On Combat Hospital, there were a gazillion Canadian flags all over that show. And I think it probably bugged them a bit. And I actually know that our set deck guy was sneaking them in all over the place because he thought it was kind of subversive. But
they did stand out on the wardrobe.
Yeah, it was like wardrobe, and then it was just like on the window. It was everywhere. Computer monitor.
Come on, it was a drinking game, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it turned out that way. So it kind of is what it is, and it suited that show, maybe not to that extent necessarily, but.
The one thing that going back to something Noreen said earlier, when Flashpoint aired in the States, it was kind of, I was with a friend who's a broadcaster, and it was kind of they were terrified because they really genuinely didn't know what the American audience was going to do with these police with the little square hats, and as if it was like this strange city in the north that nobody had heard of. And suddenly the show aired and people liked it. Go figure. And nobody really noticed that. It was because it was about police, it was about drama, it was about really fundamentally about character. And the situations are the same anywhere. And I think that's part of what the major change I think that's happened over the last couple of years is that everybody, particularly down south, has kind of stopped worrying about where as much as the who, and the who of it is who are the producers, who are the writers. The casting process is the same. You make the same decisions. Is that character the right character? Is that actor the right? It's not hard to look at Missy and say, "Wow, she's a star. She's very bright. She pops on the screen." A cop show, whether it's set in New York or whether it's set in Vancouver, really doesn't matter if the character that you're writing and you're working with or somebody you want to lean into and you want to experience with week to week. And I think that line has gotten more and more blurry as you guys in a lot of companies have been doing it better and better, and it's kind of stopped being about is it an American show or is it a Canadian show now, and getting down to just is it a good show, and that's.
Yeah, there's one other huge challenge though that we're all sort of talking around, and that's just numbers of people. Yeah. So we are 1/10 the size of the U.S. Maybe they're even bigger now, and so we have 1/10 the number of actors and writers and directors. So there's just that is one of the huge challenges making Canadian content, especially 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, is there's just a limited pool. So what I think we're all trying to do by doing these co-productions is increase the number of Canadian writers who are going to be recognized everywhere, and Canadian directors. There's a real challenge with actors. There's just a limited pool.
And Sheila, when you're looking at the international treaty side of it, and you're involving a couple of other international broadcasters and dealing with American casting pool, Canadian casting pool, have you found any sort of specific challenges in the casting of these series?
Well, I just want to say that apropos of what you're saying, in the 5 years of Queer as Folk, I think we got up to cast numbers, except for the leads, I think we were up just at around 600 by the time we finished 5 seasons of the show, and we had used every actor. We started to reuse actors, shockingly. So yeah, that's a big challenge. On the treaty co-pros, there are restrictions on using non-treaty people. I think you can have one lead who's not from one of the treaty countries, and a cameo. So when it comes to casting those, what makes it really easy for the big historical dramas that I've been spending the last few years doing is that they're basically European stories. So if you have a treaty co-pro with a European country, you hire a bunch of primarily British actors, but British, French, Spanish actors. And that all works for the treaty. So in other words, you couldn't hire a number of American actors and put them, even if they could do the accents, into the Borgias, for example, because of the restrictions on them. But in terms of casting, yeah, it's again, the historical dramas I think is a little bit different because our American colleagues certainly have opinions on all of that and some very strong opinions on the leads, but they also it's a different set of opinions than they would have if they were casting a contemporary American drama, I think. Don't you, Matt? There's a little bit more give there, I think.
Well, you're also limited by, there is just something about North American actors don't do period as well. It's a gross generalization, but there is some truth to that because I think the Brits and European actors are more schooled in that. So there's some American or Canadian actors who are just so contemporary, it would be really hard to throw them into the tutors. Yeah. Again, a bit of a generalization, but.
But it kind of works actually. The Stratford gang are all great at it, of course. And in fact, Kristen Holden-Reed, who's
Yeah, on Lost
I
Girl.
love on Lost
Yeah.
Girl, I suggested him actually for the Tudors, and he was fabulous on the Tudors. Kristen's just somebody who feels like he belongs in period
Yeah,
material
he's
or,
that
or
great
in
weight,
contemporary sci-fi.
yeah.
But yeah, you're right. A lot of actors just don't. They can't. There's just something very contemporary about them.
Right.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the relationships for a few minutes because I think the studio system, we haven't really had a studio system in Canada in the way that it works in the U.S. And Matt, if I was a producer in Canada and I was developing a project, how would I work with you guys?
That's an interesting challenge that I'm dealing with really day to day right now because I find just about every day I'm competing with Erin for projects.
That's why they sat us so far away.
Yeah. And truly daily. And competitively up here, because we're part of News Corp and Fox, and there's a lot of different pieces of Fox and a lot of lawyers that we have to respond to, the co-venture agreement is the best and most useful tool for us to be able to co-produce, and that leaves a lot of money on the table, and for producers up here, it's not necessarily the most appealing deal, but for us, we have to be able to answer to U.S. broadcasters, and we have to ultimately answer to IP issues that are corporate issues, and a lot of stuff that makes my head explode. But it's part of the reason why it makes it more difficult for me to compete, and we all have our successes and our failures, but we have to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more savvy in terms of the way the tax structures change on a daily basis to be able to adapt to it.
Right, and if you had a project that you were looking to set up in Canada, you'd need to find a Canadian production company or a Canadian producer like Sheila to work with. How would you go about looking for that? How would you look for that partner, and what would you look for in that partner?
Every deal is different, and sometimes, for me, it always starts with material first, and it always tends to start with the writer first, but I also have a lot of relationships with a lot of producers up here, and that tends to spawn material in a lot of different conversations. So there are, fortunately, a lot of Canadian writers have come south, and a lot of material that comes south, and so I find there are a lot of writers that I've grown up with and I've been working with for a long time, so they've kind of stopped being a Canadian writer or American. They just, you talk about Tassie or Esta or Brad Wright or guys that they've had successful shows. They're just worldwide successes. So for me, it starts there, and then we figure out the partners and the best partners for each individual project.
I find it's interesting that some of the agencies now, they actually have the Canadian list. Like you didn't really matter if you had a Canadian passport before, but now, people are looking for projects that you can set up as Canadian content. So all of the big agencies have a separate list of Canadian talent.
They actually have agents now assigned to Canada. So most of the big agencies have the Canadian agent.
I know it's interesting to see now that those groups from CAA or UTA or whatever, they are actually coming to Canada and meeting with broadcasters and pitching projects, from the Canadian writers that are living in Los Angeles. Noreen, for you guys, if there was a Canadian production company or a Canadian producer who's developing a project with a writer, and I guess what I'm trying to get to, they want to bring you a project. Are you guys open to partnering with other companies in Canada, even though you're also a Canadian company?
We are, and it's a little bit of an odd structure because E1 functions as a studio, and we also function as a producer. And quite frankly, one of the biggest things that we all try and get across to producers is we want to be partnering with production companies, be they big or small, and we want to be functioning as a studio. And in fact, we're doing a project with Paperny where we are going to function as the studio and the distributor, and that relationship will, the relationship that I always use as the best example of that is the one with Alana, who is a producer, who has a production company, Rookie Blue. She is the producer of record, and we give her full credit for being the producers. We're there to support her. We're there to fight her battles with the networks. Maybe fight is a little bit too extravagant a word, but we're there to be protective of her. And we're there also so that if the network has something that they feel it's easier to talk to us about, and to try and get us to broker a deal on. I mean, we're there to help make it happen. Oh, that sounds so Pollyanna. But that is our role, right, as studios, is we're there to just keep things moving forward. So we absolutely, it's a very long-winded way of saying, we definitely want to be in business with producers. And we think we can, we're only going to get involved in a project if we add value. So it's about how can we help move something forward in Canada or in the US or both or internationally.
Tara, for you, if you're developing a property with a Canadian writer who doesn't maybe have a relationship with the US and you see potential for maybe an opportunity to partner with ABC, would you, at what point would you suggest them bringing in an E1 or a Fox Studios or, or would you guys go to the US and approach them first on their behalf?
No, we would never do that because it just wouldn't ring true having a broadcaster pitch another broadcaster. I think it needs to come from the writer and the producer who's been intimately developing the project. And every, like Matt was saying, every case is different. So, sometimes producer, writer, showrunner will go in with their agent, with their producer's rep, with their exec producer. It really varies project to project, but it's something we definitely discuss with them because, as a partner, as a broadcast partner, we want to really know what they're doing, what their plans are, and make sure that they're going to mesh with what we're doing and what we want out of the show. So it really depends project to project.
And just a question about your U.S. relationships as a buyer of an American content. Has that played into some of the deals that you've done most recently with the U.S. broadcasters?
In what way? Sorry.
Just in terms of having an existing relationship,
right,
already broadcasting ABC programming, has that played in any way to something like Rookie Blue?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really, actually. It's interesting. It feels like there are two solitudes in a way. Mm-hmm. Our EVP of programming, Barb Williams, definitely has relationships with those network heads. But then it becomes the job of those programmers to fall in love with the show and champion it to their powers that be, on that end. So it's really it's great when it all comes together, but it's not a matter of Barb calling up whoever, Paulie, and saying, hey, you got to pick up our new show. It's just not that easy, unfortunately or fortunately.
I guess, everybody seems really open these days to these kinds of relationships, whether it's here or in Europe. And, it probably presents a lot of challenges when you get to a production stage. I mean, everybody wants to make the best show. But what would you guys say where do you hit a lot of roadblocks in terms of trying to make a meeting of the minds? I know every project is different, but maybe you could give a couple examples of the big challenges you've had to face in terms of getting everybody to agree on whether it's a casting decision or a crew hire or even closing financing, what that looks like. Who wants to start?
Noreen does.
I would say the business is, this is going to sound crazy, but the business is probably the easiest, and maybe that's just because if you don't close the business deal, you're not doing it. The creative choices things are the most challenging because it's so amorphous. There's no right or wrong answer. There's instinct, and this feels like it's going to be right, and truly, I think no one really knows anything, right? William Goldman was so right. You look at what happened this fall on television in North America, and there were great shows that bombed. Why? I don't know. Why do sort of mediocre shows sometimes take off? So it really is about, I think the key, I'm not sure I'm actually answering your question, but I think the creative choices are the toughest, which is why I go back to something that you said earlier. The relationships are so key, and I mean, I can think of specific examples on The Firm where we had our 3 partners on set for the shooting of the pilot, and the 3 of them at one point went off and duked it out in the corner and came out with an answer that they had all agreed on, which was kind of fantastic. I would say that is one of the most important things on that show, is that there's a relationship that's been forged between the Sony International Channel exec, the Shaw execs, and the NBC execs, so that because sometimes you just have to say, you can have that one. So that was our biggest responsibility and challenge, is to try and get everyone together. And we're lucky so far, right?
And hats off to you, because Noreen and her group really did help bring us all together so we could have our bonding.
There was a lot of alcohol involved at the beginning, and I do say
some good food and some nice wine. Yeah,
bring everyone together at the beginning and drink.
Yeah. So, and it's I think one thing that we all share is that we don't want to drive the showrunner and the production nutty by bombarding them with different notes. So we do like to try to come to a consensus. And as Noreen said, you win some and you lose some, and we're quite frank with each other in that way as partners. And so we like to come as one voice to them. Otherwise, they've got enough to do. They don't need to referee between us.
There's another show that shall remain nameless that we're working on with Shaw, and there was an instance that came up where the American broadcaster, who is used to always have it, like quite often they sometimes feel like we're taking the lead, saying they wanted something very specific, and it's not what our international partners wanted, it's not what our Canadian partners wanted, it's not what we wanted. And we said, you know what, we don't agree, and there's a bunch of other partners in the mix on this. If you really want that, you can cover that completely. And they said, okay, we'll agree with the group. So it doesn't always work that way, but sometimes you actually do have to, reinforce with people, you're making this together.
That really is the sign of that this business is maturing, because I think your first example, which is everybody has to go off and figure it out, is something that hasn't really happened before, because a lot of the way we all approached it was, let's keep them all apart so that we can control it, and they'll see later that we're right. And I think now we've gotten to a place where we've all got to get together and get on the same page. Otherwise, it's hard enough to make a great show without everybody agreeing. And I don't know if you've met all your audience, but there's a lot of them out there, and who knows what they want. At the end of the day, all you can do is really make the best you can make, and that's, if you've got a broadcaster, a studio, a network, and a showrunner, all as close as you can to the same page, at least at the end of the day, what you're going to end up with is something that you're at least proud to have made, and then hopefully the audience comes and it works. And most of the time it doesn't work. So that's, at least you can say you made the best show you can make. That's our job as studios, it's our job as producers. Try and fight for the best.
Okay, I have one last question, and then I'm going to put it to the audience here. But just the future of these relationships. Matt, I know you said that right now there's a real focus for you guys on these kinds of projects. Do you guys see this lasting beyond the next 6 months? Do we see it lasting along the next 2 years, or do we feel like this is just a new way of doing business? It's always going to evolve, but how do you feel about the future of these kinds of partnerships?
Oh, I think, without question, I think there will be more and more of these coming down the pike, because, and I think they will get bigger and bigger. Because I think the expectation from all the broadcasters is that these shows, what we have to deliver is more, and the only way to do that is to be able to figure out partners and figure out how to fund them. Otherwise, they just become too expensive to bear on our own. There's going to be co-productions with the UK and France and Germany and Italy, and all those markets are all maturing. So we're looking at formats and we're looking at relationships all over the world, not just here. But I think that all of them are going to evolve into more co-productions, and all the broadcasters are all growing up and getting more mature. So it isn't just America driving content, or it isn't just Canada driving content. It's a lot of different participations, all sort of making at the end of the day.
Tara,
I think I think this model, all these different models will continue, and they'll morph and they'll change slightly and adapt to different partners. But I think it makes sense in just as the appetite for programming grows while revenue necessarily doesn't. That we continue down this road. And I think the more successful shows that we have, the more chance that we'll be able to continue doing them with significant partnerships.
And I guess just in the final thing on that is, are they successful on your network?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's the key. As long as they're successful, it's going to continue. If the shows don't work,
Right.
it's not going to continue.
And it's very interesting because a simulcast, so when a Rookie Blue or a Combat Hospital is playing with ABC and the firm will play with NBC, we automatically get a bump in revenue and generally a bump in our viewership too, because we're counting for both of the services in Canada, so the ABC signal and the global signal. But what's been really interesting is to see how the shows stand up even without that simulcast. We played an episode of Combat Hospital about a number of months ago without the simulcast, and the ratings were, I'd say, 90% of what they would have been with ABC. So it's really heartening to see that, you know, viewers just love these shows and they're going to keep coming, and it isn't just because it's got that little logo in the corner that they were tuning in. So
And Lost Girl and Haven don't have the simulcasts, and they're doing
yeah, and they're
phenomenal.
powerhouses for Showcase. So
I venture to think that you don't get to go back to your bosses and say, well, but it was a great co-production, we got a deal. It has to be great.
Yeah, it has
and
to be a
that's-
good show.
yeah, exactly. It helps that they're all top 10 shows. It's helpful for us.
All right, well, I think what we'll do is we'll see if there's any questions out there. There's mics on either side, so just put your hand up and wait till the mic shows up in your hand before you try to ask the question. Anyone? Gigi, let's start with you, and then this gentleman over here.
This question is for Tara or Noreen. As this there's no model, but as this evolves, the business between the U.S. and Canada, and if you had a series that it was Canadian to begin with, is there any pressure from the American side to do more episodes than our system can kind of afford?
I think there can be, but I think sometimes the pressure comes from our side, actually.
Yeah.
You know, when we want to do more episodes, or when perhaps it isn't episodes, but it's also about timing, because we have different commissioning cycles and we have different factors at play. They don't worry about CMF, but they kind of have to when it's a big part of the financing of a show they're involved in. So there's a bit of an education in that regard for both sides on, when, in terms of option dates, like when do we have to pick up the actors? Will you be able to make the decision then? Will we be able to? So timing there are a lot of conversations about timing. Wouldn't you say, Noreen? Yeah.
Yes.
Gentleman on the right here.
I just want to get your comment on comedy for a moment. Comedy is still pretty much LA based, but I'm just wondering if there's anything that's been developed both sides of the border. I can't think of anything comedic coming from Canada being developed up here and sort of going down south. Have you got anything lined up or anything that's ever sort of gone anywhere?
I think there have been a couple of examples. 18 to Life is one. The American network didn't stay in, but that was a good example. We made a show called Testes that we got close to a sale. We made a show called Kenny versus Spenny. Yes. Yeah. Short-lived. Kenny versus Spenny is probably the most successful. Where that show aired in the U.S. On a small cable outlet and then went on to Comedy Central. Call Me Fitz is a show that DirecTV bought. It's a really good question. It's a challenge because comedy tends to be much more specific. And I actually think, I look at the success of Call Me Fitz, I think it's really good we didn't have a partner on because the producers got to make the show they wanted to make. It's a really specific show. And I think it works as a show. If we'd had someone else in the US, I'm not sure it would have worked. It needs to be very specific. Episodes, I think, is an example of a UK-US co-production that is really successful. Comedy, I think, is so hard to do. So we are co-developing some half-hour comedies with CTV and ABC, and I hope they will be successful. It remains to be seen.
So just a quick follow-up then. So are the American partners tending to come in after the first season is done, or are you co-producing right at the, or co-venturing right at the development stage with some of these other projects? Like 18 to Life, did you get the first season done and then take it south?
That's not an E1 show, and what they did was I believe, does anyone else want to, my understanding of that is 18 to Life, CBC developed the script, and then sold it in the US to ABC, who came on board, didn't move forward after the pilot.
They partnered on the pilot, I think.
Yeah, but again, a noble experiment and a good experiment, and I think one that I'm hoping gets repeated by us and other production companies and broadcasters. It's all about success, right? If you crack one, then people want to keep doing it.
I would add comedy down in the States tends not to be, when you get a Modern Family that works, it's a massively huge hit, and there are very few that travel and work internationally, partly because of the language. Drama tends to travel much more easily, so the co-production models can, the ordering cycles, everything tends to work better. Because comedy is so subjective that it kind of has to be able to work both here and there, and it's always been puzzling to me, but I think it's more and more, I think we'll see cable companies start to take chances, and then whether the broadcast networks take chances or not, we'll see.
Any other questions from the audience? The very back there, and then this woman in the front.
Hi. I'm just curious, sort of springboarding off of that guy's question, is there, because I noticed in the previews, there seems to be a variety of genres or types of shows. Is there an active genre bias? Like you'll see AMC has a particular tone and genre that they're successful in, so an Eastbound and Down will probably not come out of there. Especially with co-productions, saying that drama travels worldwide and it's easier to invest in. It's, like say an X-Files comes along, the next X-Files or something. Does each company have a particular sort of idea what they want to do, or is it a per project basis that's brought to you that you're judging?
You're talking about the production companies or the broadcasters?
Well, the broadcasters. I mean, the things you would choose to back or get behind if projects are brought to you.
It's tough. I mean, we don't generally set out to say, we want a supernatural private detective series. But when something lands in our lap that we fall in love with, all of a sudden that's what we want to do. On Global, we're in production right now on a 6-part, 1-hour series called Bomb Girls that's set in a munitions factory in World War II, and it's about women coming to work in the factory because the men were off at war, and all this fantastic world of opportunity that opens up to them under these dire and horrible circumstances. And women from all different walks of life coming together in this place. It's just fantastic. But if, 6 months ago you said to me, you will be doing a period drama set in World War II for Global, I would have said, really? So, that was a matter of producers coming in with this fantastic project that was actually inspired by, I think, one of their wardrobe people whose grandmother worked in one of these places and who had done tons of research. And they'd fallen in love with it and were incredibly passionate about it. And we just caught the fever, and we are in love with it too. So it's more a matter of what comes to us that we absolutely can't say no to. In the cases where we have gone after something specifically, and we don't generally do that, I find it's not always that successful because, you end up with something that might be derivative of something else that's successful on another service, or something that just doesn't feel authentic. So, but I would also say there are waves of different types of shows, and right now, supernatural fantasy genre is huge, and it's clearly doing very well for us with Lost Girl and Haven. We're also playing Warehouse 13 on Showcase, which is doing really well. So there are cycles and types of genres too, and we're quite happy to catch the wave as long as we love the show.
Well, I'm trying to figure out I'm on the other side of the wave as a writer, and then I have a few projects going in, and my agent's trying to figure out where to direct them. Do you find that once you become known as the people doing, the Bomb Girls, you'll get a bunch of spin-off type things people are directing towards you particularly? Because you don't want to get lost in the pile. Or again, if you fall in love with a project, you fall in love with a project. But if you've got one that's similar, are you actively now not looking for that to repeat that? If that makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, we probably wouldn't do something that we already have, but that's a very specific type of show. If you look at cop shows, we would probably do another cop show if we loved it, because cop shows are generally very successful and appealing to our viewers. So it depends on the type of show. And like I say to our producers and writers who come to us to ask those very questions, I'd never say we're not looking for cop shows, because you'll have a fantastic show and CTV will get it or CBC will get it, and I'll get very angry. So, we want to see what people have. We generally don't say we're not looking for something, unless it's youth or teen. You can say that.
It tends to go in, we tend to see big waves of things. I think Noreen kind of started a wave with the Western kind of, I don't know if we can declare it back yet, but Hell on Wheels was an utterly audacious thing for AMC to do, and everybody who's been saying, we don't want to do Westerns, no one wants to do Westerns, suddenly everybody kind of has to have their Western, because it may be so crazy that it may work. So
we tried to develop one, remember? Like a couple of years ago.
Yeah. There are certain things that the cop show, the medical show, the legal show that are genre specific and will always be evergreen. I think probably the most successful American show on TV right now, probably ironically, is Bones, which Hart's been doing for, and it's been right in the middle there going along, and it just keeps going and going and sells unbelievably well internationally. And for Fox, all of a sudden, it was kind of on nobody's radar, and then the numbers just kind of spiked out of nowhere. And it's a very traditional two-character relationship show it's well done, it's well executed. But I think if your agent was giving you advice, if I were where I would say, look where people aren't going, and try and kind of be snowblind to the trends, because you ultimately have to be passionate, truly passionate about it.
I'm not trying to sell it completely, but there is sort of...
Hi. I have a question, sort of need of education. When you look at the Canadian content that is required or you're allowed to have on a network, when you have that many partners, do you become watered down and therefore cannot meet, the Canadian content? I don't know how to phrase it. Are we in danger of having less Canadian product on our networks from your perspective? Are you seeing that?
Well, the networks are required to air a certain amount of Canadian content in prime time, depending on their individual licenses. Tara could speak to that with great authority and detail. But I think maybe if I'm intuitively understanding what you're saying, is some of what we're talking about, which involves a lot of international partners, qualifies as Canadian content nowadays. And so you're seeing more internationally motivated material on our airwaves instead of, you're seeing the Tudors or the Borgias on our airwaves,
right,
in a slot that would have in the past gone to a Canadian drama set in Canada about Canadians.
Exactly. Yes.
That's true. But I think also in the case of, again, like the Big Treaty co-pros, those two shows are minority co-pros. Combat Hospital is a majority co-pro, which means the majority of the money in the budget comes from and is spent in Canada. They still allow Canadian broadcasters to do larger, more compelling, more luscious shows for a smaller amount of money, which means that they can put some of that money into other Canadian programming. So I think still the amount of money in the system for developing 100% Canadian dramas is still all there. But yeah, there's a little bit more. And Flashpoint is a very traditional, it's really a very traditional American cop procedural. It's just set in
Yes.
Toronto.
I love that show.
It's a good show.
And not only is-
Combat Hospital.
Not only is it set in Toronto, but it's Canadian writers, Canadian
yeah.
directors, Canadian
It's a
cast.
10 out of 10 Canadian show.
Can you,
You're touching, though, on a point that a lot of producers talk about and is a very contentious issue. And you know what? There's no right or wrong answer to it. I mean, I think we would agree that any kind of co-production is good because it's encouraging more production. And there are some producers who would say absolutely not, and it's a terrible thing because it's taking money away from Canadian producers. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It's just different opinions.
I had another, just a second part. Sorry, just of all the productions you've talked about, how many originated from BC or are based in BC?
Well, Jinder Chalmers is one of the co-creators of Combat Hospitals from BC. Shattered, which we haven't talked about, is a series we did in Vancouver. We did another series called Endgame, a 13-part, one-hour drama series. Yeah, we have a number of projects we're actively developing in Vancouver. So, sorry? Oh yeah, Michael McLennan, the showrunner on Bomb Girls, is BC guy.
And Rick Drew, who created Shattered, is sitting over there in the audience.
All right, I think that's all the time that we have. I just really want to thank the panelists here. I think we're really lucky to have them here with us today. Just give them a hand. And I just want to thank Helen for all of her organizing of the panel today. And also, the panel was sponsored by the Ministry of Community, Sport, and Cultural Development. Just want to say thanks.